Howdy, folks. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you got a bit of a Dungeons and Dragons video. Going to be kind of talking about some storytelling here today, and maybe a way to make your story even more epic, or even if you're going for said epic payoff, maybe this will help you. So you've decided for your big epic payoff, or even a part of an epic payoff, if you will, you want to go for a huge melee or siege, something along those lines, and, against the big baddie. Maybe he is there. Maybe you're not necessarily going to fight him directly, but this is a part of the payoff. But realistically, the question is how do you make the moment epic? Well, I believe we can take a page from the Lord of the Rings for this one. Particularly the Battle of Helms Deep, if you will. So I feel the Battle of Helms Deep is definitely the best example that you could really go with because it's got different things that can work in role play elements. It's a high stakes thing with a huge payoff. So let's discuss how this goes. I'm not going to necessarily use the whole Battle of Helms Deep here because I'm also going to give some additional examples of things that you can work out. But Helms Deep is definitely going to be the influence and the kind of the focus, if you will, of today's video. So first thing we got to do is when we're setting something up like this, we got to have the stakes. And the stakes, especially for something like this, has to be high. So very high stakes. So what do we put at stakes? Well, maybe the big baddie's trying to conquer the kingdom, right? So of course, wherever the siege is, if you're doing a siege, you're going to have more than likely you're going to have women and children. So obviously their lives are at stake. The women and children could end up being enslaved, if not even worse. And you could be the last line of defense. Or what if you are the last line of defense for the kingdom? So we got that out of the way. Now let's get to the structure. And this is where the meat and the potatoes of everything is going to be the structure, because this is how you're going to decide how everything rolls out, how it should look. So let's start with the very beginning part of the battle, and essentially that is the arrival of the formations to the battlefield. Now, the defending force, if you're doing a siege, may already be there, probably should already be there. And with the arrival of the enemy, the attacker, the attacking force should definitely overwhelm the defending force at least 3-1, if not greater. And that is just medieval history standpoint, that attacking forces, especially when doing sieges, is a much larger force. They have to be, because they're going to suffer heavy casualties. So unless your odds are 3-1 or greater, it's not really going to feel realistic, if you will. Of course, then you have the opening salvos. You have a bit of a stare down for a little bit. You let the players kind of soak in what they're seeing, what sight they're seeing. Siege towers, catapults, line breakers, whatever you have in the enemy formations, the shock troops, the whole 9 yards. And then essentially the command for the opening salvos is given. And that's where the archers come into play. If you have any magic users, they're going to be casting spells that they can cast into the enemy formations. And of course, the enemy formations are going to assault the walls, as well as if they have any range units, the range units are going to send counter batteries. Now, this is one part I think was great with the Battle of Helm's Deep is they used siege ladders, which of course you would use siege ladders for us laying siege. And what they did as the enemy raised the ladders, they would have some type of shock trooper or berserker, if you will. So maybe you're attacking forces orcs and you have orc berserkers as shock troops on top of those ladders to start breaking down the defending force. So there you got your shock troopers are now into the assault, and then any of your melee focused characters, such as your barbarians, your fighters, they can kind of focus in on doing melee fighting and fighting back the shock troops. So right now you still have the defending force kind of on the back foot, if you will, but they should quickly counterattack. Now, the next part of your siege, you should have line breakers or some type of tougher enemy. I think this here's a really great example. You have an ogre with a battering ram. Say your enemy force is mostly compiled of orcs. Maybe somehow, some way, the big baddie decides to get trolls or giants, or in this case, an orc. Sorry, not an orc, an ogre, to maybe assault the gateway, if you will, the entryway of the castle walls with a battering ram. So your your range troops at this point needs to try to stop said ogre, try to stop said line breakers. Now, other things you could use for line breakers, catapults would be useful. And actually, there's an interesting way where maybe you could have some kind of like catapults, or cannons versus catapults, or ballistas versus enemy catapults, whatever. But catapults would also work as line breakers as well. A dragon would work, but I feel a dragon might be a little overpowered for this. It's based on how you set things up, what's the levels of the players. But for something like this, I would give it a time limit. So that way the players feel rushed. Describe the ogre charging the door and starting to hit the gate with the battering ram, and describe how the door starting to break down, and that if they don't soon stop this ogre, they're going to bust through the gate. Now the next thing to do is if that fails, maybe make a change in plan. Shock troops attacking a different gate. Maybe there's a different entryway on a small bridge. So shock troops or their standard infantry assaults said bridge, and then you have to defend that section because that was an area that was lightly defended, and now it's being heavily assaulted. So now you have to change your plan because the enemy has changed their plan. And maybe this is a good way of bringing the player characters on the offensive, as actually in the Lord of the Rings, the characters actually jumped into the orc formations and started attacking them. So that allowed, this would be a good opportunity to maybe let the player characters actually go on the offensive to kind of shock the enemy and make them back off. Of course, they're going to need a way kind of to pull back if necessary. The next thing to have, or at least that was good at the Battle of Helms Deep, is at Helms Deep they had basically like a trooper with explosives blow up a section of the wall, which would allow the enemy to pour in. You could have maybe, if the enemy had catapults, maybe the catapults actually managed to smash down the wall, or if they had siege towers, maybe the siege towers finally make it to the wall. And this once again sends things into chaos, and it kind of sends the players reeling. Now, what you could do here, this would be a great thing I think you could do, is maybe as certain types of troops like the archers fall back because they really don't have the armor to be frontline fighters, or different units are falling back to new defensive positions, that you could have the player characters involved into trying to slow down the enemy advance through the hole in the wall that they had just made, or to try and prevent the enemy from pouring over the wall with siege towers. Now, of course, by this point in the battle, with the Battle of Helm's Deep, it was felt that the chips were down, and they decided to mount on horses and ride out into the enemy with cavalry. Now, you're about ready to reach the kind of the end point, if you will, of the melee siege. And I think this is a good way to go because you first you got to put in the gravity of the situation, that the chips are down, that there's there's not much left that they can do. And hopefully the player characters will decide that it's better to die fighting than to surrender, because they're probably going to be dead anyway. And maybe there's a way you can put in that. Maybe there's a knight or something in there that decides, you know what, I'm going to ride out into the enemy, and it may influence the players to do the same. Now, with that being said, as they ride out, reinforcements does arrive, and the enemy force is driven off because of basically the shock and awe of the defenders riding out to attack them with around the same time period, where it just seems like they're going to get over the defenders will be overwhelmed. That reinforcements arrive from a different flank and in an unexpected time frame and manner. So that way it kind of throws the enemy reeling, and it kind of makes them retreat from the area. Now, this could be a good time to have like a one-on-one, or maybe the party versus the big baddie, whatever you want to go with. Or you could just say that they're drawing off and that the big baddie was, decide to retreat with his forces, which would be a good way to go if you want to, if this campaign is going to continue. So now the last part you need to wrap up too is finally, through story, tell the significance of what has happened. The upfront significance is going to be pretty noticeable. You're going to have an enemy that is dead and essentially defeated. So that basically it's going to throw the enemy into a rut. That needs to be described, and basically at this point that maybe, you set something up in story where there's different hunter killer groups looking for the defeated enemy, whoever said defeated enemy is. The next thing that you need to point across too is that the realm has been defended. And then that the heroes are celebrated in some way, the defenders as a whole. Maybe the player characters get acknowledgement for some of the things they do, such as along the lines of maybe the king decides to knight one or two of them or make them lords of the court, whatever. But it needs to be put across that the realm is protected, but that there could be more danger in the near future. And that's if you more or less want the campaign to continue. So I think realistically, the Battle of Helm's Deep gives us a really good structure of how to set up some kind of epic battle, epic melee for storytelling, if you will. But anyway, folks. Anyway, folks, I think I'm going to wrap up today's video at that. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have yourself a wonderful day.